So everybody, welcome to another How Good webinar on the next frontier for sustainability accounting. Specifically, today we're going to be talking about product footprint automation, not just for carbon, but also for nature and human rights that deserve a lot of love as well. I have the huge pleasure of being alongside Karin Jonsson from Paulig and Brian Nash from Ingredion, two people that I've been working on and How Good has been working on for the last couple of years, and with whom we've seen they are some of the people that have put the most in practice this concept and thinking around holistic footprinting. How do we move beyond carbon and how do we embrace more metrics than just greenhouse gas emissions? So we're going to have a very busy agenda today. We're going to start with an introduction to product footprint automation that I will be leading. But actually, the bulk of the time is going to be spent on hearing the case studies from both Paulig and Ingredion. So that's going to be half an hour hearing from Karin and Brian on their own experience, because it's really when the rubber hits the road that a lot of the challenges and a lot of the clarity really comes. Then at the end, we're going to have 15 minutes for Q&A. This Q&A is going to be moderated by my very good friend, Eva Clark, the Director of Marketing here at How Good. And so be sure to submit your questions and contributions in the Zoom chat. Also, feel free to introduce yourself. After all, sustainability is a team sport. And so if the webinar can also serve as a way to kind of create new connections and introductions, that will be a lovely outcome. So with that said, let's start then with the primer on carbon accounting. One of the things that I think it's useful for us to kind of just ground ourselves in is this difference between what is a footprint and what is an accounting process. So a footprint is a measure of, in this case, if we're talking about a carbon footprint, of the GHG emissions and removals of a specific thing, right? It could be a company, it could be a product, it could be a city, it could be a state, it could be the planet. And it's something that we do at a given point in time. And so here on the left-hand side, you see an example of a carbon footprint assessment that we have done here at How Good in our platform from cradle to grave. Now, the accounting process is a little bit different, right? And this is the process of measuring these metrics, but not just in a given point in time, but over time. And so in this example, you see here a screenshot of a carbon dashboard. And in this specific example, we have 25 different footprints measured at different points in time. And of course, that if you're trying to commission a new study, every time you need to calculate the footprint, it's going to get really expensive. And this is why automation is key. Now, automation is key, especially because there are very strong forces at play. And within carbon accounting, the forces are quite compelling and strong. On one hand, we see companies that want just to keep license to operate. They need to comply with the new regulations on climate disclosure requirements that are happening in both the EU, the USA, the UK, but not just these countries. We're also seeing this happening in India, in Japan, in Brazil, South Africa, and Mexico coming soon. So it's really a global phenomenon. Then companies are getting concerned because commercial teams are seeing that this is impacting the cost of goods sold. There are 23 European countries that have already implemented carbon taxes that range between €1 to €100 per metric ton. This last one is the one that is used in Sweden. And so once it impacts your cost of goods sold, that it impacts your margin, really you need to start paying a lot of attention. Third, consumer demand. Here at How Good, we're seeing that products that have lower carbon footprint claims are growing 23% faster in grocery retail. And we're also seeing customer demand. So if you're not selling to a final consumer, but we're selling to a customer, another company, if you have a B2B type of business, chances are that your customers are already asking you for this type of data. We're seeing in lots of cases, multi-million-dollar RFPs from some CPG companies, basically saying that in order for you to participate in this RFP process, you need to provide product carbon footprint data for all of the products that you wish to sell to us. And finally, investor pressure, right? Investors are noticing that climate risk is not something, it's not an externality, but it's actually internal and implicit to the company's market valuations. They're seeing that companies that emit more than their peers are basically being traded at a discount of 37.5%, according to a study of the World Economic Forum. So all of this made everyone very focused and very concerned about carbon footprinting, of course. And so the conclusion is that it's becoming more and more prevalent. When you look at CDP, CDP is the platform where companies submit their climate disclosure reports. We've seen a growth in the last 4 years of 144% in the numbers of disclosures that these companies are making. And so as kind of these disclosures become more prevalent, more and more companies become interested in software solutions that can help them automate this and do the accounting at the corporate and product level over years. But there are two challenges that we see that probably we as an industry are not addressing and meeting very effectively. The first one is fragmentation. We see companies using lots of separate different tools for corporate footprinting versus product footprinting. And it means that sometimes they're not consistent. And the second one that we think is even more relevant is incompleteness, right? When you optimize a carbon footprint without seeing your impact on other metrics, you can end up having collateral effects that exacerbate other societal issues. This is a concept that many of you will know that is known as the carbon tunnel vision. So the folks here on this call today have a shared belief that we need to move beyond just a narrow focus on carbon footprint, but we really need to push ourselves, despite it is difficult and tenuous and time-consuming and sometimes resource-intensive. We need to push ourselves into higher levels of footprinting that enable us to, for ourselves and for our customers, to see the far-reaching impacts of the products that we're putting out in the world. And so in this framework, as you see, at the most basic level, you have a financial footprint, right? You have a P&L statement, you know how much you're making, what is the revenue and the costs and the margin your product is making. At the second level, you get both the financial and the nutrition footprint. You have a nutrition score, you have a nutrition table and all of that. At the third level, you start doing a carbon footprint using standards such as the ones from the Greenhouse Gas Emissions Protocol and ISO. At the fourth level, you include carbon, but you're more holistic. So for example, the EU Product Environmental Footprint Method, as you know, considers 16 different LCA metrics that includes water eutrophication, resource use, water pollution, human toxicity. And the level 5 is really when you're not just looking at environmental, but you actually recognize that everything is integrated and that human rights is a core component of the footprint of a product. So at this moment, before we move further on how we might advance and grow towards higher levels of footprinting, we're going to be doing an anonymous survey. And so you're going to be getting 2 questions. One question will ask you at the corporate level, at what level of footprinting are you in? Is it financial? Is it nutrition? Is it carbon? Is it environmental? Is it human rights? And at the product level, what level of footprinting are you in? And so you should have seen this by now. So I'm going to give you 20 seconds to answer the survey. And then we will share the results. So you have 10 seconds left. Great, great. Keep it coming, keep it coming. Let's make sure you participate. There we go. I see lots of responses coming in. I'm maybe going to give maybe 15 more seconds. Great, great. More and more responses coming in. Okay, so I think we're good. We already have some folks that responded, so I'm going to start sharing the results. So I think I'm sharing the results, but if you're not seeing them, what we've seen at the corporate level, we're seeing 25% of companies doing financial footprint, or participants here, 20% doing financial and nutrition and carbon, and 55% doing financial, nutrition, carbon, environmental, and human rights at the corporate level. At the product level, things are a little bit different. So at the product level, we're actually seeing 19% doing financial, 29% doing financial, nutrition, and carbon, and 30% roughly doing all of the above. And so this really takes us kind of into the question of then, what does it take for us to kind of move towards higher levels of footprinting? So this is a question that How Good has been working on with our partner companies for the last 17 years. We created a platform that draws from over 600 different data sources to be able to do this accounting at scale automatically across 8 social and environmental metrics. We've scored already almost 4 million products, which makes us the largest sustainability database for food products and ingredients. And here we're going to be sharing some of the principles for footprinting automation that you can also use at your own company. And then we will share basically a quick demo of our platform so you can see how some of these principles were implemented in practice. So principle number 1, it's really important that we focus on measuring outcomes. There's a lot of work into measuring practices, but it's really on the outcome metrics that we really want to focus on. Second one, make sure you're aligning with the existing standards. There's still lots of companies creating new standards, but be sure before you create a new standard that there isn't already a standard that addresses what you're trying to measure. Third, as much as possible, try to align with your peers. We hear a lot from our supplier companies that they get kind of the same thematic questions from customers, but all come in different formats. And so if you can align with your peers, what are the questions and the metrics that you're going to be asking the supply system, it can really drive efficiencies up. 4, as much as possible, if you can invest in building a shared database. There are over 500,000 different plant species on planet Earth. No one can create a database that can cover all of these species alone. And the more we can share data points, the better. 5th, integrate data systems. Often we see data systems for formulation, procurement, marketing, R&D, sustainability being very separate. And this makes the automation process very difficult. Once you integrate operations, procurement, and R&D systems, you're able to do the automation of the footprint much faster. 6, avoid reinventing the wheel. Doesn't require much further explanation. 7, search and look for platforms that give you a pathway to incorporate primary data. 8, share maintenance costs. The cost of maintaining a solution for holistic footprinting can be quite high. And so to the extent that you can share with other companies that are interested in the same, it becomes really important to keep things going. 9, get third-party validation. And 10, build a platform that hopefully supports the entire C-suite. As you'll see here in the demo, we've put a lot of work into creating a system that serves both the needs of procurement, marketing, R&D folks, and is not just built for sustainability teams. So in this quick example, so we just kind of pre-recorded this just so you could see a little bit of how we've implemented and brought these principles to life. And so this is me logging in into our platform with my username and password. I'm going to sign in. And once I sign in, you can see that on the right-hand side, we've been looking for ways of harmonizing the corporate footprint mechanism on the right with the portfolio and the product footprint mechanism on the left. Now, because our focus is really on product footprint automation, we're really going to be looking into the products view, which you can see here. So you can see how products in the platform show up and are compared against different sustainability metrics. I'm going to pick one, the chocolate bar for the webinar. I love chocolate, and it looked like a good example to bring to you. And so you can see that in this case, we're looking at the carbon footprint of the bar. We're looking at the water footprint. We're looking at the land occupation footprint, also a soil health footprint. You can also see the impact details in terms of other metrics, such as labor risk and the impacts on biodiversity and animal welfare. You have the history chart, the life cycle assessment, where you can see the evolution in emissions of a product from basically cradle to grave. The each of these stages has a specific percentage of emissions associated with it. You have the nutrition panel, and then you have the formula details, where you're able to see for all of these different metrics, what is the contribution that is each ingredient is giving in terms of impact on the overall formulation. And then this is where you can kind of look at trade-offs and synergies and carbon tunnel vision avoidance. So for example, if we go into the sugarcane, this example right here, let's suppose that instead of using sugarcane, we use sugar from beet. So I'm going to pick and click sugar beet. And once I do this, you will see that the impact scores of the product are immediately updated. You can see which metrics were updated and how they improved or reduced. If you scroll up, you can see that this change reduced the carbon footprint in almost 30%. It also reduced the water footprint and the land footprint. And you can then see how, for example, in this carbon life cycle, what was the difference? And so you can see that in terms of agricultural emissions, the carbon footprint actually increased. In terms of land use change, it increased a little bit. In terms of transportation as well. But then when you go to upstream processing, we can see that when you go from cane sugar to beet sugar, the upstream processing reduced emissions. And this is because for cane sugar production, usually there is involved a lot of biomass burning as a fuel source, which is not the case for the production of beet sugar. And so you can see how the platform enables you to really understand how changes in an ingredient make differences in the overall product. And you can do this not only for a given ingredient, but then because the impacts of food products are so variable depending on where you're sourcing them from, you can also see, for example, in this case, okay, maybe I want to shift from the United States to Sweden as a sourcing region. And you can see again how this change impacts both the carbon footprint, but also in this case, what you're going to see is that there's also the labor risk metric also got a small improvement. And so this is when being able to have a sight into other sustainability metrics helps you manage synergies. And the same thing could be done for something like reduced fat cocoa powder in these example. So I can go, land use change is a big driver of emissions for cocoa beans. So I can rank from the highest to lowest in terms of land use change and maybe see, okay, maybe we want to replace Brazil as a sourcing region by the Ivory Coast. This has a lower carbon footprint. You can see that the statistical land use change emissions factor is almost 50% lower. And when I make this change, however, you can also see that the labor risk metric right here also increased, also got worse. And so in this case, maybe shifting the sourcing of your cocoa beans to Ivory Coast maybe is not the most future-proof strategy that one can use. And so in this case, we might want to, for example, focus the sourcing on a specific farmer or supplier that we know that reported data to us and search for it in the database, which is what you can see here, the Syntropical supplier. Once I pick this material, the data is updated and it becomes directly available. So once you do all of this, long story short, you can see how we were able to improve the footprint of this chocolate bar across carbon, water, and human rights, and also the land footprint. And all of this information can then be synthesized we can save this product as kind of an updated version. Once the version is saved, we can create and download a report, which you're going to see in just 1 second. And once the report is ready, basically we can share it with customers, share with colleagues internally. And what is powerful about this system is that it doesn't give you just the numbers from a sustainability impact perspective, but then it gives you, for example, in this case, this is based on a certified model by Carbon Trust and gives you all of the substantiation that you need to be able to to prove the impact that you're having. So with that said, I'm very happy to pass the floor to my very good friend Karin from Paulig to hear about how they're bringing this to life in Paulig. Karin, back to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Joao. And I will just start by showing my face, and then I will turn the video off. I'm sitting at a hotel with a quite bad or unstable connection. So I'm doing that and continuing from here. Yes, thank you so much for inviting Paulig and me to speak and to talk about one part of our sustainability work and our take on holistic footprinting on the product level. Not yet, please, if you go back one slide. Yes, so, I'm happy to introduce the company to you. So, yes, you can go ahead and change slide then. Starting out with this introduction. Paulig is a family-owned food and beverage company that's been around for almost 150 years and that aim to be one of the fastest growing food and beverage companies in Europe and a sustainable front runner. Today, we have operations in 13 countries with over 2,000 colleagues around Europe. The headquarters is located in Finland's capital, Helsinki, while I am located in Sweden, more precisely Mölndal, right next to Gothenburg, Sweden's second largest city. And our markets span across 70 countries with the brands Paulig, Santa Maria, Risenta, Pocolocco, and Sanoi, as well as private label products. And to tell you a bit about the products we have, you can change slide. Yes, we love tacos and Tex-Mex. And next slide. We love other world foods such as Korean-inspired or Indian-inspired. And next slide. We love coffee. And some fun facts being that Paulig's head of cupping tastes 200 to 300 cups of coffee during one workday. And also that Finland is the country drinking most coffee per person in the world, where Paulig is proud to be market leader. And next slide. We are also really proud of our high quality and award-winning flavoring assortment of over 600 products. And the next slide. We are also operating within the seeds, kernels, and specialty flours category in Sweden. And recently, we have tapped into the world of snacking. But now I want to take you back to our aim of being one of the fastest growing food and beverage companies and a sustainable front runner and connecting it to prioritizing holistic footprinting. Paulig started out as a coffee company. You can go back, please. With the owners were holding sustainability close at heart, and already for several years, Paulig has had all its coffee sourced sustainably, externally verified. But holistic footprinting is not only about going beyond carbon, but also going beyond single products or product groups. In 2020, Paulig launched an ambitious sustainability program across product categories and throughout the value chain, anchored all the way from the top and embedded in the company strategy. And then it comes down to metrics. So next slide, please. And our take on holistic metrics is, first of all, having a holistic, ambitious sustainability agenda that is based on science and where we have the biggest impact. But however, and unfortunately, we cannot do everything. So we focus on 3 overarching areas. 1, climate and nature actions, the green bubble. For example, through our science-based greenhouse gas reduction targets toward net zero by 2045, and being in the process of creating goals for nature. And 2, the red bubble, a fair and inclusive way of working, especially in high-risk areas. And 3, the yellow bubble, health and well-being of people and planet on the product level. And I will let you have a closer look at the yellow bubble and how we are working with sustainability in a holistic manner on the product level. The ambition is that by 2030, 70% of our net sales shall come from products that enable the health and well-being of people and planet. And to break this down, we started with the people health. So next slide. So yeah, enabling health for people, what does it mean? We needed a concrete goal and we wanted to define it independently, science-based and ambitious. And therefore we use a governmentally endorsed nutrition label created by researchers called Nutri-Score. This is for internal purposes to guide our reformulation work. And Nutri-Score is a 5-graded color-coded scale ranging from dark green A and light green B to dark orange E. And the score depends on the sum of healthy points from nutrients and food components with well-established health effects. And this is the most commonly used front of pack nutrition label in Europe. And to put the strategy into action, we have initiated a strategic project to coordinate the reformulation of our core products to Nutri-Score A and B. And note then that we do not have products that are typically super healthy. So this is a really ambitious goal to have the main part of the sales. The project is reported up to the highest leadership team and steered at director level with a project group of the heads of R&D and led by sustainability. And the status is disclosed each year in the annual report. But the nutritional aspect is one important part of a sustainable food product, which leads us to the planet part. And the next slide. When it comes to defining a sustainable product, it's complex. And even focusing only on climate, it's not straightforward to collect the data needed, how to measure it, and where to draw the line of a sustainable enough product. And if we want to go beyond carbon, which we want, the complexity multiplies. But what we do know is that similarly as for the people approach, we want a science-based approach, including impactful metrics, and here beyond only carbon, and we want it to be independent. So we scanned different eco-label options and approaches where how good, surprise, came out as the strongest in our opinion, covering several key metrics on the product level. And we see how good as a light touch LCA tool, enabling portfolio sustainability assessment at the large scale. And the focus lies on the ingredient level, and we know by specific LCAs we have done that the ingredients account for the most of the sustainability impact on the product level for us. And then we have separate projects focusing on transportation, packaging, and waste, for example. So next slide. And talking about holistic footprinting and holistic footprinting tools, obviously, we think how good is a competitive tool since we have chosen to use them. We appreciate this holistic approach of the 8 key metrics, not only carbon or carbon and water. And we appreciate the possibility to add Paulig-specific data, for example, sustainability projects with our suppliers, which can help us assess the sustainability impact and the current status. We also appreciate the guidance toward hotspots and solutions. And also we acknowledge the value of how good having the world's largest product sustainability database that enables our products to get a sustainability rating. But we also value the capability of calculating any other sustainability label on the market if we would decide to. But then, despite the breadth and the depth of how good, we still have to follow emerging regulations, and for us, foremost within the EU, in the area of sustainability, communication, and labeling. But we are very happy to see that how good is also well plugged in to follow this topic and the implications as well. So after 2 pilot rounds, we have now finally landed in a 3-year collaboration with How Good, through which we aim to guide our definition of a product enabling health for the planet, assess the status of the portfolio, and create a roadmap toward the goal that we have of having 70% sales from products that enable health for the planet by 2030. But then this doesn't mean that we start the work just now. Many of the actions are initiated already with the green and red bubble, if you remember, regarding climate and human rights in the value chain that continuously feeds into the product assessment and will be reflected in the product sustainability performance. And next slide, please. When preparing for this webinar, I was specifically asked by How Good about two things that usually capture the audience attention. The one, sustainability return on investment, and two, truth disruption. And luckily, the first one is one of my favorite, and the second one just became my favorite, because I will talk about return on investments as a myth. That it's a myth that we need to look for a return on investment for sustainability actions to be validated and to be done, because frankly, if we do, we will likely not find it, because there will not be a direct monetary return on all the sustainability actions that are required to create the changes that need to be done. We need to do it anyway to future-proof, to benefit next generations, both the common people and people inheriting the company. It will cost, and we need to take the cost, because the other side of the equation is what is the cost of inaction. So sustainability, as we see it, it needs to be embedded within the business model. And one example at Paulig was the launch of our climate fund, which is how we fund, for example, many of our exploratory regenerative agriculture projects, but also kick off many other concrete transformative actions. And the fund strengthens the impact and agility of our climate actions. It enhances our innovation capabilities and accelerates our progress towards our climate targets. And at the core, it has primarily helped that we move past of the immediate return on investment discussion between all teams involved. And the value of the fund this year is 3 million euro, and it will grow yearly in relation to our identified emissions reduction pathways. And this type of fund is still not common within our industry, which makes this investment quite unique. And another example is our strategic nutrition reformulation work that is done on our core products with no incentives or price increases, but we aim to absorb the initial costs. Because even more so when it comes to nutrition and health, if you make healthy products pricier and premium, you will miss the most important target groups in terms of public health, but also in terms of sales, for that matter. And I would like to end this topic and the presentation with some very wise words by our CEO that recently got interviewed in the podcast, The Growth Pod. So, yes, please.
I cannot put a marker on the ground and say, because of this that we're doing, that people will automatically want to pay more for our products. They're not. But the way that I like to think about it is, it's not a question of what is the business case for sustainability. I like to think about it in the context of what is the business case for not doing sustainability.
The Growth Pod is...
I cannot put a...
You can change slide, please. Oh, and just a few words of this. Thank you, Rolf, for these words. And I love to hear this clip and actually the whole sustainability section in this pod. But despite the framing of return on investment as a myth, I do want to mention a type of direct return on investment that Rolf is talking about further down this podcast, and something my colleagues and I are noticing markedly, and that is in talent acquisition. One thing that has attracted applicants all the way up to the highest leadership and keeps coming back is sustainability and Paulig's ambitious sustainability agenda. And I think that is the perfect ending of this presentation. And I just also remember there in the beginning, I forgot to present myself, that I am leading the work in this yellow bubble, the sustainability on the product level. So that's my task. And yeah, there I will also turn on the video to say bye and pass on to the next speaker.
Thank you, Karen. Now you can all see why Karen is a super rock star who's been doing kind of amazing work with her Paulig colleagues on pushing this. Karen, thank you so much for sharing. I'll now pass on the torch to our very dear friend and partner, Brian Nash.
Yeah, thanks, Joao, and thanks, Karen. I was just thinking that I hope my marketing team's not on because Karen's slides are very vibrant, colorful, and full of products, and mine are not. So if we could go to the next slide, please. And while we're doing that, I'll introduce myself. For those of you I don't know, I'm Brian Nash. I'm the Vice President of Corporate Sustainability for Ingredion, which is a Fortune 500 global ingredient supplier. Primarily supplying into the food and beverage space, but also a small percentage of our products are going into industrial as well. Okay, next slide, please. So what I thought I would do is kind of start out with how we traditionally were looking at things and how that's been evolving over the last few years. But in the past, we've looked at life cycles or carbon footprints or in kind of this pyramid sort of way of thinking. You know, when we get customers that ask us for information, I think at the bottom of the pyramid, you've got publicly available data. I would say on top of that, then the next level up is we're providing some Ingredion site-specific data. That might be just the the site carbon footprint divided by the tons of product produced to give you an average tons of carbon per tons of product at the site. And I would say before we became members of How Good, that was probably 90% of how we answered questions were in those bottom two rungs of the pyramid. And then maybe 5 or 10% was at the top of the pyramid with life cycle assessments, which we don't have internal resources to do. We tend to hire outside consultants to do that. But now we've got this third level of the pyramid where we're seeing a lot more of activity. That's this platform generated data. That's where we're using How Good, and that's I think speeding up our time to respond to customers, but also it's a dramatically more cost-effective way to look at that. And in this time that we've been working through carbon footprint data, we spend a lot of time asking customers, how are they going to use the data? We get a lot of people that ask for a life cycle assessment, and I think they use that as a generic term to say, what is your carbon footprint? But don't necessarily need it. And so that line of questioning has led us to kind of refine how we look at this whole process. And then I would say on top of that, what we're seeing it really evolving over the last few years is that sustainability demand is continuing to grow in complexity, right? I would love it if everybody just called and asked me about the carbon footprint of my products, and that would be fairly straightforward and simple. But it's not. It's getting to be a lot more complex than that. If we go to the next slide, I'll give you an example. We have a customer, a beverage customer that is buying stevia from us. And they also have science-based targets, so they're looking at reducing their carbon footprint. And they said to us, what's the lowest carbon footprint stevia you can give us? And just in the course of a conversation, right? And we said, well, the lowest carbon footprint stevia in the world, the place where they have the highest yields, is in the Xinjiang region of China, which many of you probably will recognize as having forced labor issues in that region, and to a number of customers, to all of them, right? When we've said that, have said, oh no, I don't want it from there. There's complexities. There's the Uyghur Labor Act in the U.S. There's reputational issues, and there's just the companies that they want to do the right thing, right? They don't want human rights issues in their supply chain, and so we see that the question was asked about lowering carbon footprint, but it's actually a lot more complex than that. So they want the lowest carbon footprint, but they also want to have human rights considered. And when we dig into it and ask them about their other sustainability initiatives, they're like, well, yeah, we would also like to have, soil health be a consideration. And so I would say that is getting a lot more complex as time goes on, right? People are looking at these things in a lot more sophisticated way than a lot of companies did maybe 10 years ago. Next slide. So when we're evaluating, product sustainability, we're finding that we're spending a lot of time looking beyond carbon, right? So that may be sustainability targets of the customer that we're working with. It might be consumer demands, could be supply chain issues, could be supply chain just continuity, making sure that they're supplying from a place that checks all the boxes in terms of their sustainability targets, but is also locally sourced, or if that's even an option. And then I would say we're also seeing, as João mentioned earlier, a lot of regulatory requirements coming down the line with EU CSDDD, the EU deforestation regulation. We're just seeing a lot more people looking at the due diligence across their supply chain. And so what our marketing group would call owning the and, which just means that there's always something else to even the most simplest request. We try to look at that in sustainability as well. So we try to really have a conversation with our customers and help them understand what is the and, right? So I want low carbon footprint, and I want low water footprint, and I want it ethically sourced. And there's always an and, even if they don't articulate it in the request, we're finding that and always exists. And then I think that we're also seeing that consumer demand space, right? And so I think I saw a Nielsen IQ report where upcycled and regenerative were two of the fastest growing areas of sustainable interest to consumers. And so we don't necessarily get to those type of things when we're looking at a traditional life cycle assessment in carbon footprinting. And this is one of the reasons that we really enjoy using HowGood, aside from finding the team there to be fantastic partners and helping us with solving some of these complex challenges and how we're trying to look at product footprinting. But it's a tool that gives us a more holistic viewpoint. And it's not the only tool that we use, but it is the primary tool that we go to help pointing us in the right direction. And if we go to the next slide, I think we can give an example. So here's an example of how we use HowGood and the tool with our customers. This was something that we shared at IFT one year, but we had actually made these where people could come by our booth and try these. But we took a traditional kind of cheese cracker and we replaced the whey protein with a pea protein isolate that we make. And then we used HowGood to evaluate the formulation change. And we found that by making that switch in ingredient, we reduced blue water usage by 6%. The product had a 47% carbon footprint reduction. And then we layered on top of that a database that we have. It's a proprietary consumer insights database Ingredion owns, and it's called Atlas. But we layered that in as well and found that with no price increase, there would be a 5% consumer preference improvement. And so that's something really interesting is that we found is layering in these consumer insights really helps us guide our customers in decision making. So I'm not going to speak intelligently because I don't remember what the exact categories are and the preferences, but let's just say that in snacking, consumers prefer lower carbon footprint. They have a price preference over that versus ethically sourced or sustainably sourced or something like that. So as we see that sustainability can be really about decision making around trade-offs, having that complex and that holistic HowGood data and being able to put some consumer insight data on top of that really gives us a lot of good insight that we can share with customers in helping them make formulation decisions. Next slide, please. So anybody that's seen me talk before knows that I always try to be quick. But just final thoughts on this. I think really we all have to start embracing the new truth, which is that carbon footprint alone doesn't fully enable complex sustainability decision making. And I agree with Karen in that sustainability kind of has to exist outside of the ROI. But I also think that there's a really strong reason for looking at platforms like HowGood. I'll share that we did a really complex externally validated ISO, validated LCA study, and it cost us over $100,000. And I think we looked at 5 or 6 products. So when I compare that to our subscription to HowGood, HowGood is a much more cost-effective approach to getting to that data, and that's how we've justified scaling up in the system internally within our business. Is that it's faster, requires less resources on our side, and is more cost-effective, and it gives us better flexibility in scope to support the business, both Ingredion and our customers. So aside from being able to provide insight to our customers, I'm amazed at how sometimes people within Ingredion have come up with creative questions for me to look at in HowGood. Our procurement group was looking at alternate sourcing for one of our crops, and they reached out to me and said, we've identified 3 places or 3 geographies where we could source those crops where the price is fairly the same, and ask if I could run all 3 of them through HowGood and see, how they fared in terms of labor practices and carbon footprint, just so we could add that into the decision-making process. I would not have come up with that on my own, but somebody in procurement had heard about the platform and just wondered if we could use it for that purpose. So again, it's just enabling better, quick decision making for us in Ingredion, and then just I think with the growing regulatory environment, it's only helping us to better meet the needs of customers and stakeholder expectations. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, João.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brian, who's already kind of a regular speaker and always a rock star here at HowGood. I'll pass on to Eva, who's going to be leading kind of the question asking that we've received during the session. So Eva, back to you.
Yes, thank you so much, both Karine and Brian. We have a number of questions coming in for all of you, but I'd love to just start with, there's some back and forth on ROI that I think is a very important point for all of us, all the speakers, and also many of us on the call. I think not just in measuring it, but also in communicating it, both internally and externally. So there are some points from Juan at Carey about ROI coming from lower risks and lower costs all the way through to market share growth and reputation. Lots of actually conversation about brand reputation from ROI. So I'd love to pose a question. We'll start with Karine and then to Brian about what do you think are the most important areas, sort of markers to measure ROI, and how are you communicating that?
I can start. Should I start then? Because I was turning it around a little bit, that not focusing so much. Of course, there can be several returns on the investments for sustainability actions, of course, and we should reap from them. But if we would look for return on investments before taking crucial decisions to do sustainability actions that are all the actions that are needed, I think we're on a shaky path, because we should do them anyway. So a little bit that is the main message. But I think we need everything that we can get in terms of incentivize ourselves and others to continue to do the sustainability actions. So I guess I'm as eager as anyone else to listen and understand. And I would say that's the business part is not my personal main focus in the company. So I wouldn't either be the best to answer that question, but listening with open ears.
And I think that the fact that Paulig is so focused on sustainability shows that you're certainly communicating the importance of it well. Brian, would you like to answer the same?
Yeah, I had a sustainability professor that once told me, and I kind of took this to heart, that there's a very small difference between going in a boardroom and being seen as a business leader that is their sustainability expert or the kind of chief tree hugger, right? And he said that just speaking the language of business sometimes helps. And while I agree with Karen that there's some of these things we have to take on good faith because it's hard to quantify the value of brand reputation, or sometimes it's hard to quantify the value of risk avoided. I also think it's important to just show that as sustainability professionals, we're looking at and making good business decisions. So I typically, when I'm presenting ROI to our executive team or our board, I'm giving the tangible and the intangible, right? So that they at least understand I'm considering the money. So in this one, it was easy, right? I took the cost of doing 6 carbon footprints or life cycle assessments and extrapolated it out to the number of products that we have and how good, and then compared that to the cost of how good, right? So that was the one that I think caught their attention. And then you're adding in all the other things that maybe are harder to quantify, which is making sure that we're avoiding labor risk in our supply chain, or being able to better market and communicate these things to our customers. Those all are maybe a little bit more challenging to put a number on, and I find that our CFO maybe would challenge the numbers if I did put them on there. But so I think I always look at ROI in terms of what's tangible and what's intangible, and sometimes I find that, at least with my executive team, the tangible numbers help substantiate the intangible, and that usually is a fairly effective tool at communicating, where we want to spend money.
Yeah, and I think highlights the importance of communicating differently when you're speaking with different audiences. I think, Brian, another question for you, and then we'll go over to Karine. And it's a question about working with your suppliers. When making significant ingredient changes, how are you best working with suppliers to source differently or reduce their footprint, and then continue to be, looking into more sustainable long-term suppliers as well?
Yeah, so in working with suppliers, I think, when we're talking about agricultural suppliers, in trying to, I think, implement practices that drive climate resiliency, this is another really interesting one, right? So we put a lot of money into sustainable and regenerative agriculture, and so part of that is to have a more climate resilient supply chain, but part of that is also to meet customer demand. So I think we just have to kind of keep clear where the line is between those. So we default to using a global standard. I think, just like Zhao mentioned, aligning with standards. We use SCI platform for sustainable agriculture. And when a customer has a commercial need or a brand need to go beyond that, then we treat that like a commercial discussion. But having that one system and that one platform lets us drive a program that enhances value and better supply chain performance across the globe. And then we figure out how we build on that commercially.
Great, thank you so much. Karine, we're getting a number of questions about Paulig's Climate Fund. I see you dropped a link in there to the press release, which I'm sure folks have gone on to, but if you wanted to take a few moments just to speak to it a little bit more, it seems like there's lots of interest there.
Yes, indeed. And so to answer the question about how it is funded, and a little bit as I wrote, it is funded as like in our regular operations in the financing process. So we have used an internal carbon price of 50 euros for each carbon dioxide ton, and then we evaluate the needed budget for our targeted climate impact reductions, and then this evaluated cost that is needed for the targeted emissions reductions is included in the financial plan and the annual budget. So applying this internal carbon price mechanism as part of the financial planning, it helps understand how how well it helps the understanding of the emissions, and just also as mentioned previously, when we discuss the actions, we don't need to discuss where should we take the cost. The cost is already there because it's pre-planned when we start going into actions. So
and yes, I encourage anyone to click that link as well to learn a little bit more about that. Joelle, I'll have one last question for you, and then you can keep the mic to wrap up. But lots of questions that came in early around capabilities of How Good's Lattice platform. Whether we measure packaging, the answer there is yes. Whether we measure animal welfare, the answer there is yes. And then, João, if you wanted to speak to how we are assessing labor risk as well.
Sure. So within labor risk, we use a summary framework from Shift from the UN guiding principles on human rights. And so Shift did kind of a summary of the UN guiding principles and looked at the major human rights risks. The How Good metric that you've seen in the demo, that labor risk metric, looks at risks specifically faced by farm workers and looks at both the severity of the risk. So we count differently forced labor or child labor type of risk differently from indebtedness of farmers. So they're considerably different. So we look at the risk level, but also the risk exposure. And risk exposure we look at by looking at the ingredients and also processing yields. And so basically to understand how many people are required to grow a given ingredient in a given origin, and that becomes a multiplier effect. And so that labor risk metric looks at both the type of risk faced by farm workers and the number of farm workers potentially at risk. And for those who are interested, we have kind of an Help Center article with kind of all of the scaling and the qualitative assessment that we do from 1 to 10 on that metric. And so with that said, I wanted to thank you, everyone, and a special thanks to Karin and Brian for sharing so much of their hard-won lessons learned, because a lot of the work that we as sustainability professionals are trying to make is damn difficult, right? We hit a lot of roadblocks. We bang our heads against the wall. It is difficult. There is so much urgency, and yet the movement feels always so slow in relation to the urgency that we have and the impact that we want to have as fast as possible. So for me personally, it really inspires me to see, people like Karin and Brian who are driving change in the industry, not just within the company, giving time to empower the rest of the food industry with insights so that we all can move faster and learn where others had success, and so also some of their lessons learned. And so thank you, Brian and Karin, and thanks to each and every one of you that joined the webinar today, because in the end, sustainability is a team sport and we have a big team right here. Bye-bye.